So before we can get into the 5 characteristics, we first have to talk about a problem with defining Art Deco because that seems to take up a lot of the airtime, is pinpointing exactly what is Art Deco, what is Art Deco painting. If you use Google or any other search engine, it's pretty bad what the uninformed surface level terrible the stuff that comes up. It's super bad. We have to get into the problem of defining Art Deco, which seems to take up almost the first chapter of every Art Deco coffee table book since the beginning, going all the way back to Hilliers, all the way back to like the very first books. And he kind of outlines it here. Usually because the writers are brought through the same art history framing approach, defining Art Deco by its stylistic influences, which is tied to the fact that it is very eclectic. It can be very eclectic. There's this commercial versus artistic side, and because it was high art and commercial, it's everything from architecture to mass-produced goods, muddles whether it's, pertaining to craftsmanship or to accessibility and commerciality. Because there's always this tendency to want to have one single cause. They want to have a linear development and evolution that always culminates with high modernism. As far as time frame, most people will say it's 20s and 30s. People also say interwar, between World War I, between World War II. Actually, it's a little bit wider than that. It's roughly about 1911 to 1945, to the end of the Second World War in the broadest. There's 3 major ways that we can see the varieties, and there is a kind of chronology to them, but it's not always super tight. The first phase, the most stereotypical, kind of the exotic, the zigzag, very ornate, the jazz age, prior to the stock market crash 29. The expo, the 1925 Decorative Art Expo in Paris, is seen as the either beginnings, or it's sometimes is considered like the apex. The second post stock market crash is in line with a kind of sense of austerity, a stripping away of the excess ornament. Second phase is the classical modernist. I think of as the high deco, which is classicism through the 20th century. Third variety is really streamline. Because of the fact that it's modernist scholars, modernist writers, and people coming through that lens, they tend to view modern movements as being as coinciding with theoretical texts or schools, and when they're trying to apply that to retroactively to Art Deco, it doesn't fit. So there's this tendency to think, well, because there was no theoretical text, which is not entirely true, but because there doesn't seem to be anything obvious as a concerted movement or school, then it's nothing at all. One of the keys for understanding the motivation behind Art Deco is called the return to order. That was a post-World War I movement viewed by high modernists as, quote, conservative response to the earlier avant-garde. crucial to the mainstream modernist narrative is this idea that artists had to deal with the fallout from World War One, the societal, all the negativity. It's as if the victim or tragic response, as the Great War, was the only option. If you think of it as kind of similar to what would happen to an individual, you could look at it as, trauma, or you could say character building. So that fairy tale tends to mirror a lot of our present day, issues. It's not necessarily a cold and objective view of what was actually occurring, and especially after the stock market crash, because there's a sort of general malaise that carries through, because you think the end of World War One is 1918, and 1920, 2 years after that, and it's only 9 years. It's a very short period of time. People cannot live without hope, beauty, and other values for very long. It's not endurable. Both sides of the Atlantic, both with so-called democracies as well as, quote, fascist regimes, classical Art Deco represented Western reordering that was, in a sense, a kind of miniature, let's say, miniature Renaissance, in the sense of making the old new again, or informing the present by the better things of the past. It's like not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There's inklings of this even pre-World War One, are related to the formalist criticism of guys like Hildebrand, in that there was a kind of decay or fossilization setting in from the art angle, as far as the late academic problems with late academic. But again, it's this idea that the only response, or that the best response, was pushed by by this lineage, we'll say, this genealogy of the avant-garde that is increasing abstraction, etc., etc., etc. That's anti-classical in nature. That's not really true. That's not really what happened. There were other reforms that were also critical, both of the throw out the baby with the bathwater modernists or whatever, avant-garde, as well as fuddy-duddies that had very strict ideas about how classicism should be expressed artistically. Why does this matter? There are inklings of this of the classical all throughout Art Deco, but especially during the 30s, and right up into and including the art that was being made during the Second World War. Of course, things slowed down naturally. Of course, it was difficult and there was disruption, but the dominant forms for especially public art, you can look at all the expos. There was many world expos. You can go far as back as in the States anyways. It's clear by the 1933 Chicago World's Fair that the fusing or the adaptation of classical and modern, both forward progressive as well as the best of Western, right? The Western classical tradition as being all kind of, moving forward. It's very much the spirit of the Renaissance. So here are 10 reasons why figurative Art Deco classical painting remains obscure. Number 1, World War II and economic devastation. The Wall Street crash in the beginning made it so that state-supported Deco classicism became more popular in the late 30s. But the Wall Street crash caused corporate lobby budgets to vaporize. The material bans during World War II The destruction of the war, that blew up a lot of stuff. It caused the destruction of many works that had just recently been made. Artists were displaced. The entire professional pipeline vanished, leaving few surviving canvases and scattered historical documents, catalogs, letters, etc. This root collapse hinders public access, continuity, and scholarly reconstruction. Number 2, institutional and conservation barriers. Most art museums never systematically acquired Deco works. They didn't prioritize them for display. There have been poor preservation efforts, leaving degraded works, often from wartime damage, in storage, limiting public and academic access. Number 3, restricted physical access. Surviving Deco works, canvases, for example, hang in bank foyers, cruise ships, private clubs. They're scarce in museums outside the West, which limits the global and academic access and also marginalizes them under the current regime. It obscures them from students and international narratives. Many works are just in private collections and thankfully have been preserved due to lovers of the work rather than institutions. Number 4, syllabus neglect. 20th century survey text pivot at 1945. Art Deco classicism is skipped as an awkward transition, dismissed by the avant-garde establishment, despite the fact that the public loved it, despite its popularity. There is an archive curriculum gap. There isn't a single textbook. There aren't annotated chronologies, entry points for students to build a mental map. There's very little scholastic effort to actually document these things the same way that happens with the mainstream avant-garde. So it leaves few role models to go and advocate for art students. Number 5, medium bait and switch. When Deco is taught, the focus is architecture and product design. Rarely ever is it painting or sculpture. So the core vocabulary never enters the conversation. Number 6, avant-garde. This is probably the most important one. Avant-garde marginalization. Anti-Art Deco avant-garde bias drives curators, academics, and auction houses to dismiss Deco especially from the opulent, popular style. It's considered lowbrow, outdated, etc. Glossy aesthetic is misread as kitsch. Commercial commissions are deemed lesser because many Art Deco works were public or interior design, etc., etc. Fragmented identity and modernist funding priorities block fine art status, therefore leaving very little mainstream media narratives or cultural. It's less popular in public narratives to hook. There aren't any movies, etc. It doesn't fit in line with that. Number 7, style erasure. Students are taught that all pre-World War II classicism is just one undifferentiated blob. Nothing tells them that the mechanized planar flesh and chrome drapery of Deco is stylistically distinct from earlier academicism. Number 8, gender taboos. Heroic nudes, frequently are idealized white females, are read today as decorative and patriarchal, discouraging curators from programming or educators from defending the work pedagogically. Yet this is what's interesting, is that so many Art Deco artists were female. This becomes obscured. Number 9, picture problem and search engine obscurity. High gloss, low contrast surfaces photograph flat. Thumbnails look bland. Black and white pictures that are from the 20s and 30s don't look the same in comparison with post-war photography. So image-based research, Google, museum websites, etc., never surfaces them to the casual student. And since most pictures are black and white, post-war art is just simply better research. It's more easily accessible. Number 10, limited contemporary advocacy. Deco classicism lacks modern champions such as scholars, collectors, etc. And more importantly, the avant-garde establishment dismisses its popularity as contrary to their progress narrative about art and the highbrow status of fine art. And it is critical to their mainstream narrative, which seeks pre-war legitimacy, for them to obscure and erase this part of history because it disrupts their legitimacy.